Shadow Comics issue number 2. So this came out in 1940. And yeah, this was basically a comic series based off of the Shadow character. And unlike some of the later Shadow comics that came out, this one was actually more of a anthology almost. Basically, you had the Shadow. In this issue, it has Doc Savage, Iron Munro, Nick Carter, Bill Barnes, Frank Merriwell. And yeah, it's basically a collection of short pulp stories. And I love the Shadow. Shadow is one of my favorites. He's easily my favorite pulp character. I love listening to the old time radio show. So I was able to find this on the Internet Archive website. I wish I could do one on issue number 1, but unfortunately they don't have it there. I couldn't find it anywhere else. But the Shadow was great. The Shadow was hugely popular in the 40s, I believe in the 30s as well. But yeah, he was basically the prototype for Batman. Like, everyone wants to say that Zorro was what Batman was mostly based off of. It's like, no, it was the Shadow. Batman was easily based off it. In fact, the very first strip of Batman ever, the very first story, was literally a ripoff of a Shadow story. Like, even some of the panels were straight up copied and just it almost looks like they were traced. So, yeah, Batman is straight up a ripoff of the Shadow, which is fine. Like, I mean, that's how it goes. And the Batman eventually evolved and became his own character. But yeah, like the whole playboy billionaire by day, vigilante by night, using the dual pistols. Batman used to do that too. The Shadow wears like a large cloak. Batman uses his cape, but it kind of gives off the same effect. I believe the Shadow was even referred to as the Dark Knight once. In some of the I almost said light novels, and some of the pulp novels. But yeah, the Shadow was great. If you guys are interested, you guys can find the collection of the radio dramas of the Shadow on the Internet Archive. I highly recommend listening to them. They're great. Sponsored by Blue Coal. But yeah, also I highly recommend, if anyone's looking for other pulp radio dramas, Pat Novak for Hire. I love Pat Novak for Hire. It's so freaking great. It was, I almost want to say a parody, but it's not a comedy. But it's almost, it's basically a pulp series that satires hard-boiled pulp series. But it's still great in its own right. It's fantastic. I love it. So yeah, this is The Shadow, issue number 2 from 1940. I gotta say, the artwork for this is freaking amazing. It's crazy how some of the artwork from literally like decades and decades and decades ago still holds up. I mean, this was what, 81 years ago? And yeah, the artwork is still amazing. I love it. I don't know. There's just like, it's funny because I didn't grow up with this. I grew up with 90s artwork. But for some reason, like, the old school art just holds like a special place in my heart for some reason, which is funny because I never really read old school comic books. Like I said, I grew up with 90s comics, and it wasn't until like later on that I eventually dipped back into like reading some of the old stuff when I can find them, especially thanks to the internet. So we start off with Windrow, and he's holding up this newspaper, and it says robbers baffle police. So basically there's this string of robberies going on, and Windrow has he's about to do a business deal. He's gonna show off some gems to some potential buyers. And he invites the commissioner in Lamont Cranston, aka the Shadow, over so that he can ask the commissioner to bring his ace inspector Joe Cardona to oversee the showing. That way, you know, since there's a string of robberies, he's kind of worried that robbers are going to show up and steal the diamonds. But the commissioner tells him, like, I can't. Like, our best inspector is already busy he's already detailed. There's basically going to be an armored truck that's bringing in $1 million, which, I mean, $1 million. Not only is that a lot today, but I mean, back in 1940, holy cow! Like, if you adjust for inflation, the $1 million has got to be insane. How much is it? Let me check it out. So yeah, $1 million would be $18,786,714. Damn, that's a huge score. So yeah, the commissioner just tells Windrow, like, you know, I can't have my ace inspector because he's already doing this work. He has to protect this armored truck that's bringing in all this money. We're actually going to bring it to the sub treasury because we're rerouting the ferry so that the crooks don't know where the truck's going to be. In the meantime, like, let me show you some of the other officers I got. So Woodrow leads them to this other area, leaving Lamont Cranston alone. And Lamont, like, just something about this whole thing doesn't seem right with him. So just in case there's like anything going down, he decides to basically booby trap the window. So then we see Lamont, and he's basically getting a ride to where the armored truck is going to be at. And Lamont doesn't have any sidekicks in a sense. Like, he has people that he conscripts to work with him, and it's people whose like lives he's saved in the past, or people who like he knows that they're criminals, but they're not like big fish, they're like small fish, but they have like either a lot of like information, or they have some skills that can benefit the Shadow better than if he were to just turn them in or kill them. So that's how he gets help. Except for Margot Lane. Margot Lane's almost like the closest thing to a sidekick that he's really got. So anyways, he has this guy that I'm assuming he's helped in the past, driving him to the location, but he arrives too late. The robbers have shown up, they tear gas the area, they steal all the money, and then they bail by jumping off the ferry and into a getaway boat. Meanwhile, we cut back to the building, the office that we were at in the beginning, Woodrow's office, and we have the buyers showing up to see the gems. And it turns out that Windrow is actually in charge of all the robberies. The reason why he asked the commissioner to show up was so that he can gain information on where the $1 million armored truck is going to be. So this was all basically like a master plan for him to find out the location of where this truck's going to get, so that he can hit it and then steal the $1 million. But what they have forgotten is that just because they're on the top floor of a skyscraper, that doesn't mean the Shadow can't get them, because the Shadow has his own vehicles, including airplanes. So we see the Shadow flying in his vehicle onto the skyscraper, and they turn on the radio, and it says, there's been a robbery. The police are baffled. And then it says, but not the Shadow. He knows. And they're like, oh no, the Shadow, is here. Where is he at? And they all look to the window where they see the silhouette of the Shadow. So they all start shooting at it. But then when they get closer, they realize that it's not the Shadow on the other side. It's basically just a painted profile of the Shadow. And that's what Lamont Cranston was doing earlier when he booby-trapped the window. So Lamont breaks in the door, and he appears behind them, and he shoots at one of the robbers. Meanwhile, he like dumps the contents of the money towards the cops as the cops arrive. But Windrow is escaping for the roof, so the Shadow chases after him. And we have like a really... The scene is kind of funny. So the Shadow flings his gun from behind shelter. Like the Shadow's like ducking somewhere, and he flees his gun in an upward arc. And Windrow is forced to dodge. And I don't know, maybe it would have been better if he wrote that Windrow thought it was like a grenade or something. Basically, the Shadow is throwing his weapon away, and Windrow is dodging out of that. So, I don't know. That part was just kind of funny, because Windrow had like a good position. He was ducked behind a chimney, so he had cover. And the Shadow just threw away one of his guns, so now Windrow is the only one armed. Because the Shadow usually carries dual pistols, but in this, he only appears to have one at the moment, unless the other one's just kept holstered and he never pulled it out. But we don't ever see that. For some reason, Windrow decides to dodge, which gives the Shadow just enough time to grapple with him. And then we see Windrow basically push the Shadow over the ledge, and next panel we see the Shadow falling to his death. But then when we see the commissioner, it turns out that Windrow got twisted in the Shadow's cloak. At the last second, the Shadow was able to wrap his cloak around Windrow and throw him off the building. And so Windrow splatters to his death. Meanwhile, the Shadow escapes in his air vehicle. So yeah, I don't know. That was kind of interesting. I liked it. It's a really short story. And because that was so short, I decided to do another one. So we got The Shadow, issue number 3. And this one has Doc Savage, Nick Carter, Iron Monroe, and Frank Merriwell as well. So in this one, we have a father and daughter at their house. And the father is talking about how he has these bonds that are worth $1 million. So once again, $1 million gets brought up. And as he's putting them away in the safe, he's talking to his daughter. He's like, Rupert has been behaving very suspiciously lately. And the daughter's like, don't worry about him. Like, tonight is Rupert's night off. So then there's this one guy, and his name is Lefty, and he's named Lefty because he's left-handed. And they decide to have him dress up like the Shadow. So that way, like, if, when any of the witnesses see him, they would assume that the Shadow is the one robbing the place. And basically, he's the one that will get in trouble instead of them. So later that night, the father tells his daughter to, go downstairs and make sure everything's locked. And as she's down there, she sees the Shadow. And she calls the police, but then Lefty, dressed up as a Shadow, shows up with his gun. Meanwhile, he forces her to go up the stairs, where he forces the dad to open up the safe at gunpoint. So Lamont Cranston, who's in the building, arrives and he punches Lefty in the face. And the father and daughter, it's kind of funny in this panel, like, father is like, well, we're safe, Ethel. The Shadow will take care of Lefty. And we just see Lefty in the background just kind of like holding his face. And it's like they're just calmly standing there while the robber is still in the area and still armed with the gun. But Lamont Cranston, who's a very, very fast dresser, is able to switch out into his Shadow costume while everyone's distracted. And Lefty basically sees a Shadow and he shoots and he misses. So the Shadow responds by shooting Lefty in his left hand. And Lefty decides to rush out. And as he's running out, his buddies are waiting out there with him. So they're like, I like this. Get the typewriter ready, boys, and move over. The typewriter, of course, referring to the Tommy gun. I don't know. I love reading these old comics and just hearing the old slang. But he sees them. He's like, oh, there's two Shadows. So the Shadow, if you guys remember, shot Lefty in the left arm, which means that Lefty has to shoot with his right arm. And the Shadow, knowing that Lefty is left-handed, decides to shoot at Lefty with his left arm. So then the henchmen that are watching see two Shadows. They see one shooting with his right arm, the other shooting with his left arm. Knowing that their friend is left-handed, they shoot at the Shadow who's shooting with his right arm and kill him. Well, it turns out that that's Lefty because his left arm was shot, so he can't use it. Hence, he was using his right arm. The Shadow, knowing this, uses his left arm to trick the guys waiting outside that he's actually Lefty. I thought that was kind of cool. Like, that's one of the reasons I love the Shadow. It's because he's not just like running guns blazing. Like, he's very, very smart. Like, he's very intelligent. He uses his brains just as much as he uses his brawn and his gunfire. But yeah, so the Shadow charges at the guys in the car, and he kills one of them. And the cops arrive just as he pulls another one out of the car. And yeah, the Shadow saves the day. The cops arrest Rupert, who's the only survivor. Meanwhile, the Shadow makes his getaway in his car. And all's well that ends well. And yeah, so that was issue number 2 and issue number 3 of the Shadow comics. I highly recommend them. Unfortunately, the Internet Archive only has a couple of issues. It has about 8, which is a shame. Wish I can find somewhere to track them down, because I want to read more. I love the Shadow. Like I've mentioned earlier, the Shadow is just fantastic. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I might do a review on the 1960 Shadow comics, the 1964, 65. I think 64. It's been forever. But that series is actually pretty decent too. It's really a shame because there have been some recent Shadow comics, and I think there's one coming out not too long. Is it coming out or is it like a movie? There's something. Basically, Dynamite released some Shadow comics. I did a review on it. It was garbage. It was really just terrible. And I think they're doing something based off of that. Like they're adapting it into something, which I hope they don't, because that series is not good. And then, of course, there's the Shadow Batman crossover, which was also somewhat recently as in the past few years. I did a review on that. I hated that too, since that was done by, I think they did a Dynamite version, they did a DC version. Either way, one of them was basically all about Batman, how awesome he was and how he was much better than the Shadow. And then the other one was basically about Damian Wayne and Batman, how great they are. And the Shadow was just kind of, basically they punked out the Shadow. Like they either made him a bitch in the series or they made him more of like an observer. It's like, dude, how are you going to punk the Shadow? The Shadow is amazing. Like I hated that so much. It was basically let's bring down the Shadow and make him look bad so we can prop up Batman. As if Batman needs any propping up. And it's also a shame because Batman is a rip off of the Shadow. You guys may disagree, but he's clearly ripped off of the Shadow. As I mentioned earlier, like his very first story is a literal rip off a Shadow story, almost down to the individual panels, to basically prop up the bootleg version so that you can make the original look bad. Like, I hated that series so much. Fuck that series. I usually try not to curse in these reviews, but oh god, I hated it. But yeah, the original Shadow comics from the 1940s are great. 1964 was pretty good. I think there was obviously more. Don't remember what years the other ones were, but those I believe one of them was good. The other one wasn't so much. I don't know. I don't remember. It's been forever. Love this series. Love the Shadow. Highly recommend it. Wish I could find more than just the 8 issues that's on the Internet Archive. But yeah, check them out. I mean, they're on the Internet Archive. You can read them for free. So I'll leave a link to where you guys can read it in the description below. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. Tell me what you guys think. Any Shadow fans out there? It's always nice to meet other Shadow fans. And yeah, if you guys got any recommendations, let me know. Especially if it's old timey stuff, definitely let me know. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of like going back and reading like these old school comics. I grew up with like 90s comics, but I love going back and reading stuff from like the 80s, 70s, 60s, 40s. Like in this case, like there's just something about reading them that's just so fantastic. And I love the artwork and stuff like that. It's great stuff. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. See you guys next time. So what'd you guys think of that video? I hope you guys enjoyed. If you guys haven't already, please subscribe, hit that bell for a notification, leave a like if you enjoyed the video. And if you didn't enjoy the video, thank you for watching it this far, and I hope the next video is more to your liking. Feel free to check out the playlist that you guys see, and I hope to see you guys next time. Later.